Ruth Macklin's knuckles went white against the clerk's desk. The rubber stamp came down hard, thud, and the word delinquent bled red across the tax notice. $847, Pettigrew said, not meeting her eyes. 6 months, Miss Macklin, or the county forecloses. The two ranchers waiting behind her shifted boots on the pine floor. The sound scraped through Ruth's chest like a dull blade. Silas Drummond pushed off the wall where he'd been leaning, tobacco staining his smile. I'll give you $200 for the whole spread. Water rights included. Someone snickered. Ruth's face burned, but she kept her jaw set. No. Pettigrew slid another paper across. New boundary survey, filed legal 3 weeks back. Ruth's gaze dropped to Silas's boots. Red clay clung to the heels, not the gray hardpan around Copper Ridge. Where you been surveying, Drummond? His smile didn't slip, but his eyes went flat. Ruth walked out of the territorial office into sunlight that felt too bright. The door rattled shut behind her. Dust hung in the still air, and somewhere down the street a dog barked twice, then quit. Her gelding Flint stood tied at the rail, ears flicking at flies. She ran a hand down his neck, felt the heat of his coat, the solid muscle underneath. The surveyor's chain at her waist clinked softly, her father's, the links worn smooth from decades of measuring honest boundaries. Silas came out behind her, boots heavy on the boardwalk. Offer stands till Friday, he said. Ruth swung into the saddle without looking back. Flint knew the way home. They rode west out of town, past the rail yard where young Tom Garrett was stacking ties, past the last sorry excuse for a fence that marked where Copper Ridge ended and empty prairie began. The land opened up, all sage and sparse grass and the kind of silence that made a person think too much. Ruth's ranch sat in a shallow bowl of hills, the house a weathered gray square against brown earth. 40 acres under fence, another 600 running to scrub and rock. Her father had homesteaded it in '72, back when the territory was wilder and a man's word on a survey still meant something. She dismounted at the barn, pulled Flint's saddle, checked his hooves. The off-hind shoe was loose, another cost she couldn't afford. $847. She'd been counting broken fence posts all spring, telling herself she'd fix them come fall when cattle prices rose. But fall was 4 months off and the county didn't wait. Inside the house, she set coffee to boil on the stove. The smell of it filled the small room, bitter and familiar. She pulled the tax notice from her pocket, smoothed it flat on the table. The numbers didn't change no matter how many times she read them. A survey filed 3 weeks ago, before she'd even known she owed back taxes. That wasn't how things worked. Assessments came first, then disputes, then resurveys if someone contested. But Silas had filed his claim before she'd gotten her notice, like he'd known the bill was coming before she did. Ruth stood, paced to the window. The sun was high now, turning the land white gold. She could see the fence line from here, running north toward the ridge she never rode. Too rocky up there, too easy for a horse to break a leg. Flint whinnied sharp from the corral. Ruth grabbed her rifle from beside the door and stepped outside. Flint was at the far rail, head high, staring toward the ridge trail, his ears pinned back, then forward. Easy, Ruth called. She walked out to him, rifle in one hand. He stamped, pulled against the rope halter, then lurched sideways. His right foreleg buckled. Whoa! She dropped the rifle, grabbed his halter. Blood ran dark down his cannon bones, soaking into the dust. A clean gash, deep, just above the fetlock. Ruth knelt, ran her hands over the wound. Not a kick, too straight. She looked back at the trail he'd come from, nothing but scrub and stone. Flint pulled again, not away from her, but toward the ridge. His nostrils flared, blowing hard. What's got into you? She fetched a rag from the barn, wrapped his leg tight. The bleeding slowed. He let her lead him a few steps, limping but weight-bearing. He turned his head north, toward the ridge, and whinnied again. Ruth looked that direction. She'd ridden that trail maybe twice in 10 years. Her father used to go up there when he was surveying, back when he still had contracts. There was an old line cabin near the high point, built for crews doing boundary work in the '80s. Nobody used it now. Flint pulled against the halter, ears pricked. You saying we got business up there? The horse stamped his good foreleg. Ruth fetched her canteen, slung it over her shoulder, picked up the rifle. She didn't saddle him. He was favoring that leg too much. She'd walk. The trail climbed through scrub, winding between boulders that held the morning's coolness. Flint followed without needing the lead rope, limping but steady. Ruth scanned the ground. After a quarter mile, she found it. An iron surveyor's stake, half buried where the trail narrowed, fresh dirt around the base, like someone had shoved it in recent. She crouched, touched the stake. The metal was cold, the edges sharp. A horse running in dim light wouldn't see it till too late. Flint nudged her shoulder, kept walking uphill. The line cabin came into view 20 minutes later, a low structure of weathered boards, windows boarded over, the door sagging on leather hinges. No smoke from the chimney, no horse tied outside. But Flint walked straight to it, stopped at the door, and waited. Ruth's gut tightened. She cocked the rifle. "Anybody in there?" Silence. Just wind over stone and the creak of old wood settling. She pushed the door open. The cabin exhaled dust and mildew. Light slanted through cracks in the boarded windows, striping the floor. A broken cot sagged in one corner, a rusted stove in the other, mouse droppings scattered across everything. Ruth stepped inside, rifle ready. The floorboards creaked under her boots. The place smelled old, not just empty but forgotten, like nobody had set foot here in years, except the floor near the cot showed scuff marks, fresh. She knelt, ran her fingers over the boards. One was loose, the nails pulled partway up. She wedged her fingers under the edge and lifted. The space beneath was shallow, just deep enough to hide something flat. A leather-bound ledger lay there, dust thick on its cover, but the edges worn smooth from handling. Ruth pulled it out, brushed off the grime. The leather cracked when she opened it, and the smell of old paper rose sharp. Her father's handwriting covered the first page. Survey notes, dated June 1872. Boundary measurements, witness signatures, meets and bounds in his careful script. She flipped through, page after page of surveys, all dated through the 80s. Then near the back, an entry from June 1890. Spring boundary dispute, Drummond parcel adjacent west line, measured twice, my line holds at 40 rods from Cottonwood marker. Drummond claims 52 rods and would take my spring. Asked him to witness my measurement, he refused signature. Told him the county won't honor unsigned disputes, he left angry. Ruth read it twice. Her father had surveyed this boundary 2 years ago, and Silas had tried to move it then, failed because he wouldn't witness the legal measurement. But if Silas filed a new survey claiming that boundary now... Hoofbeats outside. Ruth shoved the ledger inside her coat, stood fast. Through the door crack, she saw a rider coming up the trail. Silas's bay mare, the white blaze unmistakable. She moved to the corner behind the door, rifle low. Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. The hoofbeats stopped. Leather creaked as Silas dismounted. His boots crunched gravel, coming closer. "Anybody in there?" His voice carried that same easy confidence from the tax office. Ruth pressed her back against the wall, barely breathing. Silas stopped just outside the door. She could hear him muttering, not to her, just talking to himself the way men do when they think they're alone. 3 more parcels by winter, railroads paying double for right-of-way, long as the titles are clean, he spat. The sound hit the dirt wet. Macklin girl's got 6 months. She'll sell. Ruth's hand tightened on the rifle stock. 3 more parcels. He wasn't just after her land. He was working a pattern. Silas's boots scraped as he turned. "Should have buried that ledger deeper, old man." He started toward the cabin. Ruth shifted her weight, ready. Then another horse whinnied, distant back down the trail. Silas stopped. "The hell?" He walked back to his mare, mounted quick. Probably some drifter. His voice faded as he rode off, heading north away from town. Ruth waited, counting her heartbeats. When the sound of hooves disappeared entirely, she moved to the door, looked out. Flint stood where she'd left him, ears forward, watching the empty trail. She exhaled slow, feeling the ledger's weight against her ribs. Her father hadn't been drunk when he died. He'd been fighting Silas Drummond over boundary fraud, and he'd hidden the proof here where nobody would think to look. Ruth led Flint back down the trail, moving fast despite his limp. The iron stake was still there, driven into the narrow spot where a horse couldn't avoid it. She kicked it loose, shoved it into the brush. Somebody had planted that on purpose, right where her fence line ended and the ridge trail started, keeping people away from the cabin, keeping them away from whatever was hidden there. By the time she reached the valley floor, the sun was past noon. Ruth didn't go home. She turned Flint east toward town, toward the only person she could think of who might know what to do with a dead man's survey notes and a living man's fraud. Cole Bridger's forge sat on the north edge of Copper Ridge, a low stone building with a chimney that ran smoke most days. The sound of hammer on anvil rang out as Ruth approached, steady and rhythmic. She tied Flint at the rail, checked his bandage, still holding, and pushed through the door. Heat hit her like a wall. Cole stood at the anvil, broad-shouldered and gray-bearded, bringing a hammer down on glowing iron. Sparks scattered across the dirt floor. He looked up, saw her, and set the hammer down. "Miss Macklin." "Need a word, Cole." He wiped his hands on his leather apron, nodded toward the back room. "Office is through there." The back room was cooler, lined with shelves holding record books and deed boxes. A fireproof safe stood in the corner, door closed. Cole shut the door behind them, gestured to a chair. Ruth stayed standing. She pulled the ledger from her coat, set it on his desk. Found this in the old line cabin up the ridge. It's my father's. Cole opened it, scanned the pages, stopped at the June 8090 entry. His jaw tightened. Drummond tried this before. And my father stopped him. But now Silas filed a new boundary survey 3 weeks ago, and I just got hit with $800 in back taxes. That seem like coincidence to you? Cole looked at her, then back at the ledger. Your father's entry says Drummond refused to witness in June of 90. That's right. But Silas's new filing... Cole moved to the safe, worked the combination, pulled out the town record book. He flipped pages, ran his finger down columns of dates and claims. His face went hard. Silas's survey is dated May 1890. Ruth felt the floor shift under her. Before my father refused him. A month before. Cole looked up. That dog won't hunt, Ruth. Your pa's ledger proves Drummond's lying about when he surveyed. For the first time, in 3 weeks, Ruth let herself hope. Then Cole turned the page, in the record book, and his expression changed. What? He didn't answer. Just turned the book toward her. The page edges were ragged, torn, not cut. Whole sections missing. Somebody ripped out the original filing dates. Ruth stared at the torn pages. The edges were jagged, ripped fast, not careful. Someone had been in this safe and pulled out evidence. Who has access? She asked. Cole's mouth tightened. Me, the county clerk, and Pettigrew when he needs to file deeds. Pettigrew, the same man who'd stamped her tax notice that morning, the one who couldn't meet her eyes. Cole closed the record book, set it on the desk between them. I'll check the filing index, see if there's a cross-reference. He pulled out a smaller ledger, flipped through pages of inked entries. His finger stopped halfway down a column. Here, Drummond parcel filing, May 14th, 1890. Witnessed by... He squinted. Witness signatures smudged. Can't read it. Convenient. Too convenient. Cole sat back, rubbing his beard. The forge hammer had gone quiet in the front room, and Ruth could hear the tick of the office clock, the hiss of cooling metal outside. So Silas files a survey with a fake date, Ruth said, tears out the pages that would prove it's fake, and then waits 2 years to use it against me. Why now? Railroad, Cole said. They're buying right-of-way parcels for the northern spur. Silas probably owes money, needs to flip land fast. Your water rights are worth more than your grazing land. Spring-fed cattle bring premium prices. Ruth thought about what she'd overheard at the cabin. 3 more parcels by winter. He's doing this to other people. I'd bet on it. Cole tapped the ledger. Your father probably wasn't the only surveyor who refused to sign off on Drummond's boundary claims. Ruth picked up her father's ledger, felt the weight of it. 20 years of honest work, hidden in a cabin, because the man who did it knew someone would come looking to destroy it. What do I do? Cole was quiet a moment. Then he stood, walked to the window. Outside, the street was mostly empty. Mid-afternoon, too hot for lingering. A freight wagon rolled past, wheels creaking. Legally, he said, you're in a hole. Silas's claim is filed and recorded, even if the dates are wrong. Without those torn pages, I can't prove when he really filed. And judges don't like reopening 2-year-old surveys. So I lose. Not if we find another way to prove he's lying. Cole turned back to her. Your father's ledger helps, but it's just one man's word against another. We need something harder. Physical evidence. Like what? Boundary markers. Your father would have set stones when he surveyed in 72, carved the date into them. If we can find those stones and they say 72 instead of 90, Silas's whole claim falls apart. Ruth remembered the entry in the ledger. 40 rods from cottonwood marker. My father mentioned a cottonwood on the boundary line. The old one near your spring? Has to be. Cole nodded slowly. That's where we start. But Ruth... He met her eyes. If Silas buried those stones or chipped the dates off, we've got nothing. And if we go digging on disputed land, he can claim we're tampering with legal survey markers. He already tried to cripple my horse to keep me away from that cabin. Cole's expression hardened. You sure? Iron stake buried in the trail, fresh dirt around it. Flint cut his leg on it this morning. Then he's desperate. Cole moved back to his desk, pulled out a sheet of paper, started writing. I'm going to check the other filings from 1890, see if there's a pattern. You go home, tend your horse, And don't go near that boundary spring until we have a plan. If Silas knows you found the ledger—" The office door opened. Both of them turned. A boy stood in the doorway, maybe 16, rail-thin, wearing work clothes stained with creosote. Tom Garrett from the rail yard. His face was pale, hands shaking. "Mr. Bridger, He saw Ruth, stopped. "What is it, Tom?" The boy looked at the floor. "I need to tell you something. About Mr. Drummond." Ruth's chest tightened. Cole gestured him in, shut the door. "Go on." Tom's voice came out barely above a whisper. "Last spring, Mr. Drummond paid me $10 to deliver an envelope to Mr. Pettigrew. Told me not to tell anybody." "What was in the envelope?" "I don't know. It was sealed." Tom finally looked up, eyes red-rimmed. "But after I delivered it, Mr. Pettigrew started buying new clothes. And his wife got that piano she'd been wanting." The room went very quiet. Outside, someone called to a horse. A door slammed somewhere down the street. Cole's voice stayed level. "When was this?" "April, maybe early May." Tom's hands twisted together. "I didn't think nothing of it then, but this morning I heard folks talking about Miss Macklin's tax trouble and Mr. Drummond's survey, and—" He swallowed hard. "I think I helped him do something bad." Ruth felt the ledger in her hands, felt the torn pages in Cole's record book, felt the shape of it all coming together. Silas had paid Pettigrew to backdate the filing and rip out the evidence, and this boy had carried the bribe without knowing what it meant. "You did right, telling us," Cole said quietly. Tom nodded, but he looked like he might be sick. "Tom," Ruth said, "that $10, you still have it?" "Spent it on my sister's medicine. She had the fever bad." "Then you did what you had to do." Ruth looked at Cole. "He's just a kid. This isn't on him." "No," Cole agreed. "It's on Drummond." He turned back to Tom. "You tell anybody else about this?" "No, sir." "Keep it that way for now. Can you do that?" Tom nodded, back toward the door. "And Tom," Cole's voice stopped him, "you did the right thing coming here. Remember that." The boy left, closing the door soft behind him. Ruth set the ledger down. "So Pettigrew's bought. The records are destroyed. And Silas has 6 months to wait me out." She looked at Cole. "What now?" Cole picked up the ledger, handed it back to her. "Now we dig up those boundary stones. And we do it before Drummond thinks to bury them deeper." Cole locked the office behind them and led Ruth back through the forge. The fire had burned down to coals, glowing red in the dim interior. He pulled on heavy gloves, lifted a piece of half-finished ironwork from the anvil, and set it aside to cool. "I'll need to check the full record book tonight," he said. "See how many other claims Drummond filed around the same time. If there's a pattern—" The forge door swung open. Silas Drummond stepped inside, flanked by a man in a dark suit. Lawyer, by the look of him. Silas's eyes went straight to the ledger in Ruth's hands. "Afternoon, Cole, Miss Macklin." His voice was pleasant, but his gaze wasn't. "Heard you took a ride up the ridge today, Ruth. Dangerous country up there for a woman alone." Ruth said nothing. Her hand tightened on the ledger. The lawyer stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from his coat. "Mr. Bridger, I'm Howard Cass, representing Mr. Drummond in matters of property dispute. I'm here to serve notice that any attempt to contest my client's legally filed boundary survey will be met with a claim of defamation and interference with lawful commerce." Cole took the paper, read it without expression. "That's so. And furthermore," Cass continued, "we're aware that certain parties may be in possession of documents belonging to the estate of Jacob Macklin, deceased. Those documents, if they exist, are subject to probate review and cannot be used as evidence without proper legal authentication." Ruth felt her throat tighten. They were already moving to block her father's ledger. Silas leaned against the forge wall, watching her. "Like I said this morning, Ruth, $200. Offer's still good." "No. $300 then, but only because I'm feeling generous." He smiled. "Clock's ticking. 6 months goes faster than you think." Cole set the lawyer's notice on his desk. "You done?" "Not quite." Silas pushed off the wall, walked to the fireproof safe. He tapped it with one knuckle. "Town records are public trust, Cole. Be a shame if someone accused you of tampering with filed documents. Might lose your contract to maintain them." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Cole's jaw worked, but he kept his voice level. "I don't tamper." "Glad to hear it." Silas turned to Ruth. "And you, filing false claims against a legal survey is a criminal matter. Ask your friend here what the penalty is for perjury in territorial court." Ruth met his eyes. "I'm not filing anything false. Then we've got no problem. Silas tipped his hat. See you Friday, Ruth. Think about that 300. It's more than you'll see after the county auction. He walked out, the lawyer following. The door swung shut. The forge fire crackled, the only sound in the sudden quiet. Ruth turned to Cole. He knew about the ledger. He saw you carrying it. No. Ruth shook her head. He knew before I walked in here. That's why he came with a lawyer already drafted. He's been watching me. Cole moved to the safe, opened it, pulled out the town record book again. He flipped to the torn section, stared at it. Then he turned more pages and his face changed. What? He didn't answer, just kept turning pages, his finger tracing entries. Then he stopped, looked up at Ruth. Tom said he delivered that envelope in April or early May. Right. Cole turned the book toward her. Look at the dates on these filings. Ruth scanned the page. 3 boundary surveys, all filed in May 1890, all adjacent to existing homesteads, all signed by Silas Drummond as surveyor, and all witnessed by Clerk Pettigrew. He's been doing this for 2 years, she said. At least. Cole flipped to another section. More entries, more Drummond surveys, all witnessed by Pettigrew. And every one of these parcels has water rights or rail access, the kind of land the railroad wants. Ruth felt sick. How many families? Cole counted under his breath. 7 that I can see, maybe more. And nobody contested? Can't contest if you don't know the survey's wrong. Most of these folks probably can't read survey language. They just got hit with tax reassessments like you did, couldn't pay, and sold cheap. Cole closed the book. Silas buys low, flips to the railroad at market rate, clean profit, all legal on paper. Except it's not legal. He's forging dates and bribing clerks. Proving that's the problem. Cole gestured at the torn pages. Without the original filing records, all we've got is your father's ledger and a scared kid's confession. Drummond's lawyer will tear both apart in court. Ruth set the ledger on the desk, feeling the weight of 6 months pressing down. $847. She'd never saved that kind of money in her life. Even if she sold every cow, every piece of equipment, she'd come up short, and Silas knew it. What about the boundary stones? She asked. If we find them, they might hold up, but Ruth— Cole's voice went quiet. Digging on disputed land without a court order gives Drummond grounds to claim tampering. His lawyer could use that to invalidate anything we find. So I just lose. I didn't say that. Then what are you saying? Cole pulled off his gloves, set them on the anvil. I'm saying this is bigger than one ranch. Silas has been stealing land for 2 years, and if we go at him the wrong way, he'll bury us both and move on to the next target. He met her eyes. We need more than stones. We need witnesses. We need other families he's cheated. We need enough evidence that the territorial judge can't ignore it. That takes time. It does. I've got 6 months. I know. Ruth picked up the ledger again, held it against her chest. Her father had fought Silas 2 years ago and lost. Died with people thinking he was a drunk who couldn't hold his land. She wasn't going to die the same way. Cole, she said, if I sell to Silas now, he wins. If I fight him in court and lose, he wins, and I owe him legal fees. Either way, I'm done. Ruth, so I'm not doing either. She moved toward the door. I'm going to dig up those stones, tonight, and if his lawyer wants to call it tampering, let him try to prove I did it after I show the whole town what's carved on them. Cole caught her arm. That's a good way to get yourself shot. Maybe. Ruth pulled free. But sitting quiet's a sure way to lose everything. I'll take my chances. She walked out into the afternoon heat. Flint was still tied at the rail, favoring his bad leg. She untied him, started leading him home. Behind her, she heard Cole's voice, low and resigned. Stubborn is your father. She didn't turn around. Stubborn was all she had left. By the time she reached the ranch, the sun was slanting gold across the valley. Ruth unsaddled Flint, checked his bandage, still clean, and turned him into the corral with fresh water. He drank long, then stood with his weight off the injured leg, watching her. Rest up, she told him. We've got work tonight. Inside the house, she set the ledger on the table, made coffee, and waited for dark. 6 months, $847, and Silas Drummond waiting to take it all. Ruth touched the surveyor's chain at her waist. Her father's hands had worn these links smooth, measuring honest boundaries for 20 years. Tonight, she'd use it to prove he'd been right all along. Full dark came late this time of year. Ruth waited, watching the light fade through the window, listening to the house settle around her. The coffee had gone cold hours ago. She drank it anyway. When the last blue drained from the western sky, she moved. She pulled on her father's old work coat, heavy canvas that smelled of dust and sweat. The surveyor's chain clinked as she walked, a sound she'd heard her whole childhood, her father coming home at dusk, that soft metal music announcing him before his boots hit the porch. Ruth picked up a shovel from the barn, a coil of rope, a lantern. Flint watched from the corral but didn't call out. Smart horse, knew when to stay quiet. She walked north, away from the house, following the fence line by starlight. The land rose gradual toward the spring, a quarter-mile from the ranch buildings. She'd been born hearing the sound of that water. Summer and winter, it never quit. Her father had built everything around it, 40 rods from the cottonwood marker. The cottonwood stood alone, gnarled and thick-trunked, roots drinking deep from the spring's overflow. Ruth had climbed it as a child, carved her initials into the bark alongside her father's. The tree had been old even then. She lit the lantern when she reached it, hung it from a low branch. The light threw shadows that jumped and twisted. She unclasped the surveyor's chain, let it pool in her hands. 40 rods, just under 700 feet. Her father would have measured west from the tree, following the spring's course downhill. That's where the boundary ran, where his land ended and the disputed parcel began. The parcel Silas claimed now. Ruth walked the measurement, counting links, the chain sliding through her hands with the old familiar weight. The ground here was rocky, hard-packed, good place to set a boundary stone. Wouldn't shift or sink over time. She reached 40 rods and stopped. Set the lantern down, started searching. The first stone took 20 minutes to find. It sat half buried in scrub, barely visible even with the lantern close. Ruth cleared away dirt and dead grass, exposing the top surface. Her father's mark was there, a surveyor's cross, clean cut, but the date carving was gone. Chipped away, the stone face rough where someone had taken a hammer to it. Ruth sat back on her heels, breathing hard. Silas had already been here. She moved to the next likely spot, 30 feet south along the boundary line. Her hands were shaking now, from cold or anger or both. The second stone was smaller, wedged between two rocks. She hauled it free, turned it over. The date was intact on the bottom face. 1872. Ruth let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. She traced the numbers with her finger. Her father's work, carved deep. He'd known to hide the date where it wouldn't be seen from above, where someone would have to pull the stone completely free to destroy the evidence. A sound behind her. Footsteps. Ruth grabbed the shovel, spun around. A woman stood at the edge of the lantern light, old and thin, wrapped in a shawl despite the warm night. Esther Webb, the midwife. She'd delivered half the children in the territory, including Ruth. Esther. Ruth lowered the shovel. You scared me half to death. Saw your light from the road. Esther moved closer, leaned on her walking stick. Figured you were either digging for gold or digging for trouble. Trouble. Thought so. Esther looked at the stone in Ruth's hands, then at the surveyor's chain coiled on the ground. That's your father's chain. Yes, ma'am. And you're out here proving he wasn't a liar. Ruth felt her throat tighten. Trying to. Esther was quiet a moment. Then she reached into her shawl, pulled out a small cloth bag. She opened it, shook something into her palm. Dried flowers, pressed flat, their petals brown but intact. I picked these at this spring in June of 72, Esther said. The day I delivered the McClure baby, your father was here setting boundary markers. I watched him carve the dates into the stones. She held the flowers out. He made me witness it, signed my name in his survey book. Ruth stared at the flowers, then at Esther's face. You remember that? I remember every birth I've attended, child, and I remember your father was an honest man. Esther's eyes were sharp in the lantern light. Silas Drummond's been spreading poison about you, same as he did about Jacob, saying you're unstable, saying griefs made you see patterns that aren't there. I'm not. I know you're not. Esther pressed the flowers into Ruth's hand. But Ruth, I'm 67 years old. Silas will say my memory's gone. These flowers in your father's ledger and the stone, it's evidence, but it might not be enough. Ruth closed her fingers around the flowers, felt them crackle. Then what do I do? You make it public. You call a town council hearing, you bring every piece of proof you've got, and you make Silas answer for it in front of witnesses. Esther tapped her walking stick against the ground. But you need something he can't explain away, something the land itself remembers. Ruth looked at the stone, the carved date. These markers. If you can find enough of them, and if you can prove they're original. Esther gestured toward the tree. Your father set 4 stones around this boundary. I watched him do 3 of them, find the others before Silas destroys them. He's already chipped one. Then dig faster. Ruth stood, picked up the shovel. Her back ached, her hands were raw, but she kept moving. Esther stayed, holding the lantern, her presence steady in the dark. They found the third stone an hour later, intact, dated 1872. The fourth was gone. Just a hole, where it should have been, fresh dirt scattered around. Ruth knelt beside the empty space, touching the disturbed earth. Still damp underneath, dug up within the last day or two. He knew, she said. He always knew, Esther replied. Question is, can you prove it before he buries the rest? Ruth woke to pounding on her door. Dawn light came gray through the windows, and for a moment she thought she'd dreamed the whole night. The stones, Esther, the missing marker. Then she saw the dirt under her fingernails and knew it was real. The pounding came again. She opened the door. Cole stood on the porch, hat in hand, his face grim. You need to come to town. What happened? Silas filed a complaint with the territorial marshal. Says you've been destroying survey markers on disputed land. Cole's voice was tight. He's asking for an injunction to keep you off the property until the boundary dispute's settled. Ruth's stomach dropped. I didn't destroy anything. He's the one who... I know, but he's got a witness who'll swear you were digging up stones last night. Who? Cole didn't answer, but his expression told her enough. Someone had seen her and Esther. Someone had gone straight to Silas. Ruth grabbed her coat, followed Cole to his wagon. They rode in silence, the wheels creaking over the rutted road. When they reached town, she saw the crowd before she saw the reason for it. The general store's porch was packed. Men in work clothes, women with shopping baskets, even a few children pressed close to hear. In the center stood Silas, talking loud enough for everyone to catch his words. Caught her red-handed, digging up legal boundary markers. My surveyor set those stones in 1890, filed proper with the county. Now she's trying to destroy evidence because she knows her claim won't hold. Ruth climbed down from the wagon. The crowd turned to look. That's a lie, she said. Silas smiled. You calling me a liar in front of all these witnesses, Ruth? I'm saying your survey's dated wrong, and you know it. My survey's filed legal, signed and witnessed. He pulled a paper from his coat, held it up. Right here. County clerk's signature, territorial seal. All proper. Witnessed by Pettigrew, Ruth said. The same clerk you paid to backdate your filing. The crowd murmured. Silas's smile didn't slip. That's defamation, Miss Macklin. You keep talking like that, I'll have no choice but to... I've got proof. The words came out louder than Ruth intended. The street went quiet. Silas tilted his head. What kind of proof? My father's survey ledger shows he measured that boundary in 1872, and you tried to dispute it in 1890. He refused to witness your claim because your measurements were wrong. Your father was a drunk, Ruth. Everybody knows that. Heat flooded Ruth's face, but she kept her voice level. He was honest, which is more than I can say for you. Honest men don't die face down in a ditch. Silas folded the paper, tucked it back in his coat. And their daughters don't go digging up stones in the middle of the night like criminals. Someone in the crowd laughed. Ruth felt the sound like a slap. Cole stepped forward. I've seen the town record book, Silas. Pages are torn out right where your filing should be cross-referenced. Pages get damaged. Books get old. Silas shrugged. That's why we keep the original documents in the safe, which I notice you have access to, Cole. Hope nobody thinks you've been tampering. The threat landed clean. Cole's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Ruth looked at the faces around her. Some showed sympathy, most showed doubt. A few looked away entirely, not wanting to get involved. Silas had spent 2 years building this, the legal filings, the bribes, the reputation. And Ruth had nothing but a ledger, some broken stones, and the word of an old woman and a scared boy. It wasn't enough. She turned to leave. The crowd parted for her, and that somehow felt worse than if they'd blocked her way. Ruth. She stopped, turned. Tom Garrett stood at the edge of the crowd, his rail yard clothes still stained with creosote. His face was pale, hands shaking, but he stepped forward. Miss Macklin's telling the truth. The street went dead quiet. Silas's smile finally slipped. Tom, you don't know what you're... I delivered the envelope, Tom said, his voice cracking. Last spring, Mr. Drummond paid me $10 to take a sealed envelope to Mr. Pettigrew. Told me not to tell anyone. Ruth's heart kicked hard. The boy's confused, Silas said quickly. I send lots of correspondence through. It was $50 inside, Tom continued. I saw Mr. Pettigrew open it at the land office. He counted it twice, then put it in his desk drawer. Silas took a step toward Tom. You're making a mistake, boy. No, sir. Tom's voice steadied. The mistake was keeping quiet this long. Cole moved to stand beside Tom. Then Esther Webb pushed through the crowd, leaning on her walking stick. The boy's not the only witness, she said. I watched Jacob Macklin set those boundary stones in 1872. I was there when he carved the dates, and I've got pressed flowers from that spring to prove it. She pulled the cloth bag from her shawl, held it up. The crowd shifted, murmuring. Ruth saw doubt flickering across faces now, not in her, but in Silas. Silas looked at his lawyer, who'd appeared at his elbow. They spoke in low voices. Then Silas turned back to the crowd, his expression smoothed into calm again. This is exactly why we have courts, he said, to sort through accusations and hearsay. I'm sure a judge will find the truth. Then let's ask one, Ruth said. What? A hearing. Town council. You bring your survey and your witnesses, I'll bring mine. Let the council decide whose claim holds. Silas hesitated, just for a moment, but Ruth saw it. Fine, he said. But when I win, you pay my legal fees on top of what you already owe. Deal? Ruth felt the trap closing. If she lost, she'd be buried deeper. But if she backed down now, she'd lose anyway. Deal. Silas smiled. Council meets Friday. 3 days, Ruth. Hope your evidence is better than your father's word. He walked away, the lawyer following. The crowd began to break up, voices rising in argument. Cole touched Ruth's arm. You sure about this? No. Ruth watched Silas disappear around the corner. But it's the only play I've got left. Tom approached, still shaking. Miss Macklin, I'm sorry I didn't... You did fine, Tom. Ruth managed a thin smile. Better than fine. Esther tapped her walking stick. 3 days to build a case. We'd better get to work. Ruth nodded. 3 days to prove 20 years of fraud. 3 days before she lost everything. She looked at Cole. Can we dig up the rest of those stones without Silas getting an injunction? Not legally. Then we do it tonight, and we do it quiet. They came at midnight. Ruth, Cole, Esther, and Tom. 4 shovels, 2 lanterns, and a wagon to haul the stones if they found any worth saving. The spring murmured in the darkness, steady and indifferent. Ruth had mapped the boundary in her mind, counting off where her father would have set markers. Every 40 rods, he'd written in the ledger. 4 stones total. They'd found 3. 1 chipped, 2 intact, 1 missing. Spread out, Cole said quietly. Stay within earshot. They worked in near silence, the only sounds their shovels biting earth and the occasional scrape of stone on stone. Ruth's shoulders burned. Her hands had blistered yesterday and torn open tonight, but she kept digging. An hour passed, then another. Tom found the 4th stone buried 2 feet down, wrapped in burlap like someone had meant to come back for it later. He called out soft, and they gathered around. Cole unwrapped it carefully. The date was intact, 1872, and below it, Jacob Macklin's surveyor mark. That's 4, Esther said. Ruth knelt, ran her fingers over her father's carving. He'd made these marks 20 years ago, never knowing his daughter would need them to save what he'd built. Hoofbeats on the road. Cole doused his lantern. Ruth did the same. They crouched in the scrub, listening. A rider came up the trail, moving slow. He stopped near the cottonwood tree, dismounted. Ruth heard the creak of leather, the jingle of bit chains. Then a voice, familiar, hard with anger. I know you're out here. Not Silas. His voice was deeper, smoother. This was someone else. Ruth stayed low, barely breathing. Cole's hand found her shoulder, squeezed once. Stay quiet. The rider moved closer, boots crunched on gravel. Then he spoke again, louder. Ruth Macklin, I'm Vern Hadley. I ranch 10 miles east of here, and I got a story you're going to want to hear. Ruth stood slowly, brushed dirt from her knees. I'm listening. Hadley was maybe 50, weathered and lean. He held his hat in his hands, turning it by the brim. In the starlight, his face looked carved from the same stone they'd been digging. Drummond took my water rights 3 years back, he said. Filed a survey that moved my boundary 100 yards east. By the time I figured out what he'd done, I'd already paid taxes on the smaller parcel. Couldn't afford to fight it in court. Cole emerged from the shadows. Why didn't you contest? I tried, got a lawyer, filed a complaint. Then Drummond's man came to my house one night, told me accidents happen to people who make trouble. My barn burned the next week. Hadley's jaw worked. I've got 3 daughters, Mr. Bridger. I couldn't risk them. Ruth felt something cold settle in her stomach. You think he burned it? I know he did. Found surveyor stakes in the ash pile afterward. Hadley looked at the stones scattered around them. Heard you were calling a hearing. Figured maybe if enough of us speak up, he can't burn us all. How many others? Cole asked. That I know of, 4, maybe 5 families. All of them lost land to Drummond's surveys. All of them too scared or too broke to fight back. Esther stepped into the light, leaning on her stick. You willing to testify at the council hearing? Hadley was quiet a long moment, then he nodded. If it'll stop him from doing it again. More hoofbeats. Ruth's hand went to the shovel, but Cole caught her wrist. Wait. 2 more riders appeared, a man and a woman, both older, both carrying lanterns. They stopped when they saw the group. Hadley? The man called. Here, Morrison. The couple dismounted, approached slow. The woman spoke first, her voice thin but steady. We heard you were coming out here. We want to help. Morrison cleared his throat. Drummond took 40 acres from us in '91. Said his survey showed our fence line was wrong. We couldn't afford to hire a surveyor to prove otherwise. And the Cheneys lost their grazing rights, the woman added. And the Pratts lost access to the river crossing. 6 families, Mr. Bridger, all in the last 3 years. Ruth looked at Cole. His expression was grim. If this many people testify, Cole started, then half the county learns Drummond's been stealing land under legal cover, Esther finished, and the other half gets nervous about their own boundaries. Morrison nodded. That's why we're here. But Miss Macklin, you need to know, Drummond's got friends on the council, men who've profited from his surveys, or who owe him money. This won't be an easy fight. I didn't figure it would be. And if you lose, the woman said quietly, he'll come after all of us for speaking against him. Our land, our reputations, maybe worse. The words hung in the cool night air. Ruth looked at the faces around her, weathered, scared, but here anyway. They'd come in the dark, risking everything, because someone had finally stood up and said no. I can't promise we'll win, Ruth said, but I can promise I'll fight. And if that's enough for you to stand with me, then I'm grateful. Hadley put his hat back on. When's the hearing? Friday, dawn. We'll be there. The others nodded. Morrison helped his wife back onto her horse. Hadley mounted, tipped his hat to Ruth. Your father was a good man, Miss Macklin. A lot of folks forgot that. Maybe it's time we remembered. They rode off, lanterns swinging in the dark. Tom broke the silence. There's more of them than I thought. More that'll come forward once these do, Cole said. Pattern's clear now. Drummond's been running this scheme across the whole county. Ruth looked at the stones they'd dug up, her father's marks carved deep. Then let's make sure everyone sees it. They loaded the stones into the wagon, careful not to chip the dates. 4 markers, 20 years old, proof carved in granite that couldn't be bribed or threatened or burned. By the time they finished, false dawn was graying the eastern sky. Ruth's hands were raw, her clothes filthy, her body aching. But for the first time in 3 weeks, she felt something other than desperation. She felt ready. Cole drove the wagon. Tom and Esther rode alongside. Ruth walked behind, one hand on the tailgate, the surveyor's chain at her waist catching the first pale light. Friday would come, the council would decide, and Ruth would stand there with her father's stones and his chain and his name, and she would make them listen. The council chamber smelled of old wood and tobacco smoke. Dawn light slanted through the east windows, catching dust in the air. Every bench was packed, ranchers, townspeople, even the store owners who usually stayed clear of disputes. Word had spread fast. Ruth sat at the front table, her father's ledger open in front of her. Cole stood beside her. Esther and Tom sat in the first row, behind them Hadley and the others who'd come forward, 6 families ready to testify. Across the aisle, Silas sat with his lawyer Cass and Pettigrew the clerk. Silas wore a clean suit, his hair slicked back. He looked calm, almost bored. The 3 council members filed in, Chairman Howell, a rail company man, Mrs. Marsh, who ran the boarding house, and Garrett Sr., Tom's uncle. They took their seats at the high table. Howell banged his gavel. Council's in session. Matter before us is a boundary dispute between Silas Drummond and Ruth Macklin concerning the western parcel adjacent to Macklin Ranch. Mr. Drummond, you filed first. Present your case. Silas stood, nodded to his lawyer. Cass rose, placed a document on the table. Mr. Drummond's survey was filed May 14, 1890, properly witnessed and sealed. It establishes the boundary 42 rods west of the cottonwood marker, which includes the disputed spring. Miss Macklin's claim that her father surveyed differently is based on an unauthenticated ledger in the testimony of individuals with personal grievances against my client. He sat down, clean, simple, already dismissing everything Ruth had. Howell looked at Ruth. Your response? Ruth stood. Her hands wanted to shake, but she curled them into fists at her sides. My father surveyed that boundary in 1872, when he first homesteaded. His measurement put the line at 40 rods from the cottonwood, not 42. The difference is 200 feet, which includes the spring. She laid the ledger on the table. This is his survey book. It shows he measured that boundary multiple times over 20 years. Every time, the same result. Cass stood. Your Honor, that ledger could have been altered at any time. Without witnesses to verify. I witnessed it, Esther said from her seat. All eyes turned to her. She stood slowly, leaning on her walking stick. I was there in June of 1872 when Jacob Macklin set the boundary stones. I delivered the McClure baby at the spring that day, watched him carve the dates into 4 markers. She pulled out the pressed flowers. I kept these from that spring. They're dated in my midwife log. Cass smiled thinly. Mrs. Webb is 67 years old. Her memory of events from 20 years ago cannot be considered reliable. My memory's fine, young man. Better than yours, I'd wager. A few people in the crowd chuckled. Cass's smile tightened. Nevertheless, without physical evidence, we have physical evidence, Cole said. He gestured to Tom, who stood and wheeled in a handcart. 4 boundary stones sat on it, their carved surfaces visible even from the back of the room. Ruth stepped forward. These are the original markers my father set. Each one is carved with the date 1872 and his surveyor's mark. She pointed to the first stone. This one was buried near the disputed boundary. Drummond tried to chip the date off, but you can still see it. She moved to the second stone. This one was intact when we found it. The date's clear. Howell leaned forward. Where exactly did you find these? At 40 rods west of the cottonwood, exactly where my father's ledger said they'd be. Silas stood abruptly. She dug those up at night, without authorization. Could have carved those dates herself. With what? Ruth asked. A chisel? In the dark? These cuts are 20 years old. Any stonemason can tell you that. Mrs. Marsh spoke for the first time. I'd like to see them closer. Cole lifted the stones one by one onto the council table. The 3 members examined them, running fingers over the carvings. Howell pulled out a pair of spectacles, squinted at the dates. These look old, he admitted. Of course they look old, Cass said, but there's no way to prove when they were actually carved, or by whom. Ruth felt the moment slipping. She'd known this would happen. Silas's lawyer twisting everything, raising doubt. She looked at Cole, who gave her a small nod. Time for the one thing they couldn't explain away. There is a way, Ruth said. She unclasped the surveyor's chain from her belt, let it pool on the table. The links caught the morning light. My father used this chain for every survey he did. It's marked with his initials, and according to the old surveyor's code, boundaries measured at first light with a witness present are considered binding. She picked up the chain, walked to the window. The sun was just clearing the horizon, spilling gold across the valley. I'll measure the boundary right now, in front of this council, and everyone here, 40 rods from the cottonwood to where those stones were buried. If the measurement matches my father's ledger, then his survey stands. If it doesn't, she met Silas's eyes. I'll drop my claim. The room went silent. Howell frowned. That's unusual. But legal, Cole said. Sunrise Witness Clause. It's in the Territorial Surveyor's Code, Section 8. Garrett Sr. nodded slowly. I remember my father talking about that. Old tradition. Silas stood. This is theatrics. My survey is already filed, and then you've got nothing to fear from a public measurement, Ruth said. Unless your survey's wrong. Silas's jaw tightened. His lawyer whispered something urgent, but Silas waved him off. Fine. Let her measure. When it doesn't match, I want this recorded as evidence of her false claim. Howell banged the gavel. Council will adjourn to the boundary site. Everyone stays where we can see them. No interference. The crowd filed out, boots loud on the wooden floor. Ruth led them west, toward her ranch, toward the cottonwood. The sun rose higher, warming the air. By the time they reached the tree, 50 people had gathered, the largest assembly Ruth had seen outside of church. She stood at the cottonwood's base, where her father's initials were carved alongside her childhood marks. She looked at Cole. Witness? Witnessed, he said formally. Ruth began measuring. The chain ran through her hands link by link, the same motion her father had done 1,000 times. 40 rods. She counted out loud so everyone could hear. The chain pulled taut at exactly 40 rods, right where the intact boundary stone had been buried. She turned to the council. My father's measurement holds. Silas stepped forward. This proves nothing. She could have moved the stones to match. Then explain this, Ruth said. She knelt beside the excavation hole where they'd found the stone. This depression is 2 feet deep. The soil layers are undisturbed, except where we dug yesterday. Any surveyor can see this hole is 20 years old, not 2 days. Howell crouched, examined the hole, the soil strata. He stood, looked at Silas. Drummond, your survey shows the boundary at 42 rods. That's correct. But these stones are at 40 rods, and they're dated 1872, 19 years before you filed your claim. Howell's voice hardened. You want to explain that? The stones could have been moved. By whom? Mrs. Marsh asked. Jacob Macklin's been dead 3 years. Who moved them? Silas's face flushed. I'm saying they're not reliable evidence. Then produce your own boundary markers, Cole said. You surveyed this in 1890. Where are the stones you set? Silence. Cass cleared his throat. Mr. Drummond's survey methodology didn't require... Every legal survey requires permanent markers, Cole said. Section 12 of the Territorial Code. You know that, Counselor. Tom stepped forward, his voice shaking but clear. Mr. Drummond paid Mr. Pettigrew $50 last spring. I delivered the envelope. 2 weeks later, his survey was recorded with a date that made no sense. All eyes went to Pettigrew. The clerk's face had gone pale. You witnessed his survey, Ruth said. Signed your name to it. But you didn't witness any actual survey work, did you? You just signed a paper for money. Pettigrew looked at Silas. Silas looked at his lawyer. The silence stretched. Hadley spoke from the crowd. Drummond did the same thing to me 3 years ago. Filed a survey that stole my water rights. I was too scared to fight it. Morrison raised his hand. And to me, 40 acres gone. One by one, the others stepped forward, 6 families, all telling the same story. Howell's face had gone hard as granite. Mr. Drummond, I'm suspending your surveyor's license pending a territorial investigation. Your boundary claim against Miss Macklin is denied. Original survey lines are reinstated. He banged the gavel. The sound echoed across the valley like thunder. Silas left without a word, his lawyer following close. Pettigrew stayed behind, sitting on a rock with his head in his hands. The territorial marshal would come for him later. For now, he was just a man who'd sold his honesty for $50 and a piano. The crowd dispersed slowly, folks shaking Ruth's hand, offering quiet words. Hadley gripped her shoulder. You did what the rest of us couldn't. We did it, Ruth said. All of us. By noon, only Cole and Esther remained with her at the boundary. The stones sat in a line where they'd been excavated, her father's marks facing the sun. What happens now? Ruth asked. Cole pulled a paper from his coat. Council's reassessing your taxes based on the correct acreage. Comes to $340. Still a sum, but manageable. $340. Ruth could make that selling half her herd and tightening through winter. It would hurt, but she'd survive. And Drummond? Marshall's opening an investigation. If those other families press charges, he'll face fraud counts in territorial court. Cole folded the paper. He's done, Ruth. Won't be surveying or buying land in this territory again. Esther tapped her walking stick against one of the stones. Your father would be proud. Ruth touched the carved date, felt the rough surface under her fingers. 20 years those marks had waited underground, holding truth until someone needed it. He knew, she said quietly. That's why he hid the ledger. He knew Silas would come back eventually. Smart man, Cole said. Stubborn man. Ruth managed to smile. Runs in the family. She helped Cole load the stones back into the wagon. They'd be reset properly, cemented in place with witnesses present and everything documented. No more burying the truth. Tom appeared on the ridge trail, leading Flint. The horse's leg had healed clean, barely a scar visible. Tom handed Ruth the reins. Thought you'd want him back. Thanks, Tom. The boy shifted his weight, looking at the ground. Miss Macklin, about that envelope I delivered. You did right, telling the truth. That took more courage than keeping quiet ever would. Tom nodded, still not meeting her eyes. My uncle says I can work at his shop now, learning accounts. Says maybe I can clerk at the land office when Pettigrew's gone. You'd be good at it. I won't take bribes. I know you won't. Tom tipped his hat and walked back toward town. Ruth watched him go, thinking about second chances and how hard they were to come by. She rode home as the sun climbed high, Flint moving easy beneath her. The valley spread out familiar and unchanged, the same scrub, the same rocks, the same hard ground her father had claimed with nothing but a chain and his word. At the ranch, she unsaddled Flint, turned him into the corral with fresh water. He drank deep, then stood in the shade, tail swishing flies, content. Ruth walked the fence line, checking posts by habit, found 3 that needed replacing. She'd get to them tomorrow or the day after. Time enough now. The land wasn't going anywhere. Inside the house, she set the surveyor's chain on the table beside her father's ledger. Both worn, both marked by years of use. She'd keep them together, pass them on someday if there was anyone to pass them to. For now, they were hers to hold. She made coffee, sat on the porch as afternoon heat settled over the valley. The spring murmured in the distance, steady as a heartbeat. Her spring, her land, earned twice over, once by her father's honest work, once by her refusal to let that work be erased. A rider appeared on the eastern trail. Ruth tensed, then relaxed. Just a neighbor, probably coming to hear the full story. Word would spread through the territory by week's end. Some would call her troublesome. Some would call her brave. Most would just call her Macklin's daughter, and that was enough. She thought about her father's last years, the whiskey and the silence and the way people looked past him like he'd already died. He'd known what Silas was, had tried to stop him, and when that failed, he'd hidden the proof and waited. You held on long enough, Pa, Ruth said to the empty air. I just had to catch up. The wind picked up, rustling through the scrub. The chain on the table clinked softly, metal on wood, the sound of surveying and boundaries and measuring what was fair. Ruth picked up her coffee cup, felt the warmth through the ceramic. Tomorrow she'd ride into town, settle accounts with the tax office, maybe buy Cole a drink for standing with her when it mattered. She talked to Hadley about organizing the families Silas had cheated, make sure they got their land back, or compensation. There was work to do, always was, on a ranch. But it was her work now, on her land, with her name attached to it free and clear. She finished her coffee, set the cup down, and stood. The fence posts wouldn't fix themselves. Ruth picked up her hammer from the porch, settled her father's chain at her waist, and walked out into the afternoon sun. Flint watched from the corral, ears forward. Come on, she said, we've got mending to do. The horse followed without being led. Smart animal, knew when the fighting was done and the living could start again. Behind them, the house stood quiet. Inside, on the table, the ledger lay open to her father's careful script. Measured twice. My line holds. It did. It would. The land remembered. Weeks passed before Ruth allowed herself to believe it was truly over. The territorial marshal came, took statements, arrested Pettigrew. Silas Drummond left the territory entirely. Some said he headed to Montana, others claimed Colorado. Either way, he was gone. The families he'd cheated began reclaiming their land. Some through quiet settlements, others through court orders. The county appointed a new clerk, a stern woman from back east who checked every filing twice and kept the record books locked. Cole reset the boundary stones properly, mixing cement that would last another 50 years. Esther attended as witness, just like she'd done in 1872. This time she brought her granddaughter, teaching the girl how to press flowers from the spring for her own records. Ruth paid her taxes in full by November, selling cattle at fair prices and keeping enough breeding stock to rebuild the herd come spring. The ranch wasn't rich, but it was solvent. That was enough. On a cold morning in early December, she rode out to her father's grave. The surveyor's chain hung at her waist as always, the links catching thin winter light. She knelt, cleared away dead grass from the headstone. Someone had left flowers there, fresh ones, tied with string. Ruth didn't know who, but it didn't matter. Her father's name had been cleared. People remembered him now, as he'd been, honest, stubborn, unwilling to bend the truth for money. She touched the granite, cold and solid. We held it, Pa. The land, the spring, the name, all of it. The wind answered, carrying the smell of sage and snow coming down from the high country. Ruth stood, settled the chain at her belt, and walked back to where Flint waited. Behind her, carved into the headstone beneath her father's name, someone had added new words. He measured true. That was enough. That was everything. Ruth mounted, turned toward home. The valley spread wide and open, hard ground and sparse grass in a spring that never quit. It wasn't easy land, but it was hers. She'd earned it twice, once through blood, once through truth. And the surveyor's chain at her waist would pass to the next generation when the time came, links worn smooth by honest hands, ready to measure fair boundaries in a world that still needed them. Some things couldn't be bought. Some things couldn't be stolen. Some things just were, carved deep as stone and twice as patient. The land remembered, and so would she.